How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore,
and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence, impoverished. Like, it's Lin-Manuel, man.
I am a fan of Hamilton musical.
I auditioned for The Office quite a bit.
Can you give me a synopsis of just like what that hero story looks like?
I know not to make the same mistakes I made, and if you make enough, you narrow them down. Our brains are wired to receive stories. Our brains are like thirsty for stories. Everybody just basically becomes teenagers, right? You just want to prove that you know better and that dad doesn't know everything.
Starting a church, starting a business, those two aren't really all that different.
There's also a dance and there's an intimacy to story one-on-one.
All right, welcome back to the Roll with Steve podcast. I'm here with Joe Boyd today, and I'm excited for this because I sat down in a presentation that Joe was giving not too long ago where I realized that I know nothing at all about storytelling and how important storytelling is in the context of a business. I've always known people who could tell a story in a way that made me want to lean in and listen to what they had to say, but I never knew the science that was behind it. And so since that talk, I've been digging in to what you created, giving us those steps, the Joseph Camp. I want to dig into all of that today. And as you leave this episode, I want you to understand that if you're an aspiring business owner or you already have a business and you're looking for ways to really connect the hook to the offer, that story is what's there in the middle. And as we dive into this, Joe's an absolute expert in this. So by way of background, Joe's a former CEO of a company. We'll talk about that just a little bit, but he's also a former actor, a former writer, and a former producer. He's got a religious background and still actively involved in the religious side of the house, sure, more or less. Maybe. Yeah, no, right?
Maybe not.
But also owns a consulting firm today that helps major companies, Procter & Gamble, NASA, to tell stories. And I think the insights that we'll pull out of Joe today will be applicable whether you have a big business or whether your business is just getting started, if it's just in the idea stage. So with that being said, I think out of all the things that you do, from improv and the coaching and the consulting that you do today with storytelling, one of the most interesting things about you that I found, because I am an office nut job, was that you were third in line to be Andy Bernard in The Office. By way of intro, can you tell that story to us of what brings us here today?
This is going out in the World Wide Web. I'm not sure I was third in line. I was told there were 3 people left when and I didn't know it was Andy necessarily, but I figured it out afterwards. We knew it was, I think that role at first was supposed to be like a 4 or 6 episode arc. So it was still, at that point in my career, would have been a huge deal.
Sure.
But he wasn't supposed to be a series regular. He, partially because Ed Helms killed it, he ended up getting a series regular gig out of it. But yeah, I auditioned for The Office quite a bit. Allison Jones is the casting agent. She really liked me. I came from an improv background. So I did improv with the Second City here in Vegas for many years. And then I was in a show called Tony and Tina's Wedding here in Vegas. I did like 500 fake weddings and then did like some college improv stuff. So that was my background. The Office pulls from a lot of improv folks. So Steve Carell's obviously a Second City guy. But folks you wouldn't even think, like Angela and Oscar, that they were all in the improv world.
I never would have guessed that.
Yeah. So that's where I auditioned a lot of us for things. I think I had like 4 or 5 callbacks for that. And at the time, I think that was going into the 3rd season, maybe?
Yeah, maybe season 2, because I think Jim leaves in the first season and then comes
season
back.
Season 1 is 6 episodes. I think it.
Oh, it is after season 2. You're right about that. Maybe. Yeah, that's when he leaves.
So it was. I was watching it and I was loving it, but it was still like barely a thing.
Yeah.
Until Steve Carell popped with 40-Year-Old Virgin, then it got a little more momentum. But it was always like a critic's favorite, and nobody was actually watching.
Sure,
it.
Okay.
But it's still, for me, it would have been huge because I was doing like General Hospital and commercials and things like that, and really wanted to get into comedy world.
Yeah,
that's one of my sad stories. Yeah.
Well, it's a sad story, but I also think that it bleeds into some of the things that you talk about, because anyone that has seen your content knows that you talk about how failure leads to humility, and how that's a good thing. In the context of The Office, help me connect those dots of failure and humility and what it leads to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I never planned on being a professional actor. I stumbled into it in a sense. I always wanted, as you said, I grew up in the church and wanted to be a preacher and was really good at preaching, but wasn't good at all the other stuff at church. So I was a performer and a storyteller, and kind of nerdy. Like I
Sure,
like
yeah.
the studying part of it, but I wasn't a counselor or a pastor really, and or at least maybe I was, but I didn't have the emotional capacity for it.
Yeah.
So when I was in my late 20s here in Vegas, I started church here in Vegas, and I was super depressed. And my wife got me tickets to see the Second City show here because she knew I'd always wanted to kind of do that. And so it just kind of happened really fast. Within 9 months of seeing that show, I had studied with them and was performing.
Wow.
You know, and so I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. Plus, I felt old the whole time, so I was like 29, which of
The
course
improv scene is like 21. Is
yeah,
that
right,
more
right,
like
yeah.
it?
I'm 51 now, so 29 sounds like a baby. But,
Yeah.
So Jason Sudeikis, for instance, is one of my teachers, and we're roughly the same age. So I was like being taught by people about my age. They were, you know, so it always felt a little behind. So I did the shows here, then we moved to LA, and I auditioned, I think, 350 times in 3 years or something like that, and
That's crazy.
landed like 19 or something, which was pretty good.
And that's good, right? So that's not
good.
really failure.
No, well, yeah, and I was barely squeaking by, and I think when I decided to sort of give up on the acting track, several casting agents that liked me tried to convince me to stay around because they were saying, just give us 2 or 3 more years and we'll get you something.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3 years is like, you gotta have money, and my kids were getting big, and so we decided to move back home to Ohio, where we're from. I don't regret it, but it's just, you know, it definitely teaches you about rejection, for sure.
Yeah.
And you learn, you know, I am most grateful for the rejection in my acting career because it, you know, I've been in sales and stuff since then. Like, you know,
Get used to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
you close 50%. That's way better than 19
That's
out
right.
of 350. So
I mean, it sounds like 19 out of 350. You're talking about a 5-6% hit rate
yeah,
on getting an acting gig. In my mind, as someone who's a layperson who's never been around acting, knows absolutely nothing about it at all, 5% sounds pretty good.
I think it was pretty.
You
It's
know?
better than people that weren't making a living at it.
Yeah, that's
you know,
true.
I think
That's true.
I was right on that line. In raw numbers, you know, this was 15 years ago, but I was probably making 75 grand a year
Yeah.
as an actor living in LA.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you know,
it's-
you can barely live, but
I
that's
can only
it.
imagine. Yeah. I mean, LA of all places,
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
you know, with a family.
It's
too.
LA or New York, right? So
Yeah.
you can't. It's not like it's Topeka, which would be nice. You could live on 75 grand probably, but
Sure.
yeah. So
That's
it was
crazy.
But that most people were making. I forget exactly, but several years ago, I saw the average salary or the average yearly income of a SAG-AFTRA that's a union actor. It's hard to get in the union. Was under $20,000.
Okay.
So still, most people are doing it as basically a hobby. Right?
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
So it's just a hard thing to
But-
figure out.
Everyone that's doing it is kind of like everyone that joins the Navy wants to be a SEAL, but
Mhm.
most people are just working day jobs, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, I'm sure. I did not want to join the Navy or be a SEAL.
Okay, but you started a church. I don't want to breeze past that fact because one of the backgrounds you and I share is an attendance of Bible college. Although I didn't make it through 4 years, I only made it through 2. It was either they kicked me out or I left, so I decided to leave gracefully. But starting a church, starting a business, those two aren't really all that different.
No.
So having been entrepreneurial throughout the rest of your life,
Yeah.
where do you look at that experience of starting the church?
Well, I think I just, you know, early on I would have said I'm a church planter. Like I didn't want to take over someone else's church. I didn't want to do the thing that I probably should have done, like work your way up and be like the youth pastor, then the associate.
Sure.
I wanted my own thing. I wanted my own little crack at it. And I wanted to start from scratch. That was the language I had back then. Now I would say I'm an entrepreneur, and church was the first thing that interested me. So I approached church as an entrepreneur. I didn't have that language back then. We had no business classes. We had no math classes in Bible college. Like,
Yeah, I know all about that.
So
Was your college accredited at least?
yeah, it was.
Okay, mine wasn't even accredited.
It's not there
so-
anymore. It sadly went away, but
Yeah.
it's a real degree. And we did have classes about like church planting, like starting a new church. So I knew I wanted to do my own thing, and I came out here to Vegas as an intern for a year with a fast-growing church called Canyon Ridge that my youth minister from high school had moved out to Vegas to start a church. And so I was just going to work with him for a year. Then the whole plan was to go to New York City and start a church with my mentor there. But some things happened here where they asked me to stay around for another year, and one thing led to another. I ended up just staying in Vegas for 10 years, started the church. I was 23, 24. I had no idea what I was doing, but I'm sure a lot of people started businesses at that age. Mark Zuckerberg did okay, but
do you feel like you know what you're doing today all the time?
Well, now I know what I don't know. You know what I mean? Like that's all. I just know. I know not to make the same mistakes I made, and if you make enough, you narrow them down.
Yeah.
To no other choices than the things that aren't mistakes at some point. But yeah, it was a good. Overall, I think I did well. My heart was in the right place. I was good at attracting a crowd for sure. And I didn't believe my own press when it was going well. But I ultimately had like theological and questions, and I just didn't. I was still saying the things that I taught from my Bible college, but I was shifting into sort of what I believed.
Yeah.
And it's one of I feel really, and I meet with pastors all the time that kind of want to get out because they don't believe what they believed anymore, but they're good at it.
Yeah.
In most vocations, that doesn't matter really. I mean, it does a little bit, I guess, but like if you don't, I can't even think of an example, but like, if you're an accountant, you're still going to believe in numbers probably, right?
Yes, exactly.
You don't have this crisis of belief where you're like, oh, numbers aren't a thing.
Yeah.
But clergy do, because they sit around and think about God. Nobody's got God figured out. And you're going to have moments. It's the people that think about God all the time that are going to doubt the most. So,
well, having grown up in the church community, I think one of the most drastic things too is that as a pastor on a weekly basis, maybe more than that, you're kind of putting your foot down and saying, like, this is what the Bible says, this is what I believe, and teaching others that. So when you take a stand on that, I grew up in a church where the pastor no longer believed some of the stuff that he had preached 20 years ago.
Sure.
But it wasn't until after he retired that I heard through the grapevine that, well, I couldn't change that stance because some people came to the church for that particular stance. Like, it's like almost like getting followers on social media today. Well, I can't change now because like they came for this.
They came for
and like
that,
we're changing the content style. I think you can very much get stuck in that. I want to shift a little bit and do the intro to start talking about stories and crafting stories. As a former pastor, I've always thought to myself, there's just some people who just have the gift and some people who don't have the gift. Either you're an expository or you're a great storyteller and you're someone who can just get people to lean and listen to what you have to say. When I heard you speak, though, I never challenged it before then, but I started to reframe and think, oh, no, there's a science to this story stuff. You talked about the story spine. Maybe I'm using the wrong terminology on that, but can you craft for me the framework of a story?
Sure. I think story's art. It's art and science, like so many things, right? Why story is a science is because of how we are story creatures and our brains think in stories. And so it's really neuroscience. And I am for sure not a neuroscientist. I've got a theology degree and a comedy degree from Second City. But I've read things, I understand things, and it makes sense when I read it, that our brains are wired to receive stories. Our brains are like thirsty for stories. So they're looking for the stories wherever they can find them. It's the only way we make sense of the world at all. That's kind of the scientific part. The artistic part is, kind of think of feel and a vibe of how a story goes and flows. And I do think some people are born with a natural instinct, just like some people are born and they can carry a tune, or, my son can swing a golf club. Nobody really taught him. He just drives me crazy.
Yeah, I bet.
It's like a 3-handicap golfer and he plays twice a year.
Jeez.
There are some things that some people just know how to do. So I do think there's a natural instinct to storytelling. And I do wonder, like, I'm an only child and an introvert. And I think for instance, a lot of stand-up comedians are one or both of those things. I think there's something to kind of probably growing up as an observer that might feed into the creativity of people a little bit. But the story spine you mentioned is, it's usually called the Pixar story spine, but I think it predates Pixar. And I don't know if it's science so much as I just think of it as a hack.
And is the spine meaning just like the framework to tell a story?
Yeah, it's like fill in the blank for a story.
Okay.
or like Mad Libs, right?
Yeah.
So it just starts off once upon a time, and then you fill in that sentence, every day you fill in that sentence until one day. So that's your inciting incident. That's your call to adventure. And because of that, this happened. And because of that, another thing happened. Because of that, another thing happened until finally there's a resolution. And some people add, and the moral of the story is like
Sure.
this. So, but what that just forces you to do a beginning, middle, and end, which is what a story has a narrative arc, right?
Yeah.
So by filling in those blanks, it's almost like learning the scales on a piano or a guitar.
Yeah.
You start to feel like, okay, a story feels like this. It starts off once upon a time, which I talked about in the workshop you came to, represents the normal world for the hero or for the subject of the story, the protagonist, whatever word you want to use. They start in a normal world. It might not feel normal to us. So Luke Skywalker on Tatooine. Tatooine's not normal for us. It's got 2 suns and stormtroopers that kill your aunt and uncle and all kinds of crazy stuff. But to him, it was normal. Katniss in District 9. I'm not a huge Hunger Games
I
fan.
saw them all every Thanksgiving, but
That's her normal world. Frodo in the Shire, that's his normal world. Dumb and Dumber, them driving around in that dog van, that's their normal world.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what story it is, but it starts off normal to the character. And then every day they do their normal thing, right? So, Frodo smokes his pipe and walks around the Shire, and Dumb and Dumber guys clean. Were they cleaning dogs? I don't know why I keep thinking of Dumb and Dumber.
I think they were washing dogs and getting them hot dogs. I know.
until one day an event happens. We can get to this in a minute, but in Joseph Campbell's world, as this is the call to adventure, something interrupts their normal world and inspires them to go to a new world. And because of that, their life is never the same. So because of that, walk that out. And then, in story theory, things are always going on 2 levels. So like in a rom-com, the guy wants the girl, the guy gets the girl. That's what he's going to go after. His normal world is a single buffoon. His like new world at the end is a loving husband, right?
Yeah.
So we got to go through that whole thing. But underneath it all, something more is happening. He's like lonely or depressed or sad. He's empty. He's looking for something to fill that void. So every story kind of works on those 2 levels of, the classic thing is like the knight has to kill the dragon to get the pot of gold or get this treasure. But really what's going underneath is the knight is going through some internal struggle. It's really not about the gold. It's not about the dragon. It's about himself. Trying to figure that out.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by like that structure. What you just went through, kind of taking us through. I can imagine almost every story that I've seen that I enjoyed, like running through that frame of mind. Some of the simple things about it, about the normal world, and then just the everyday things that were happening, and then that event takes place. That leads them on this adventure and a journey. You mentioned Joseph Campbell, and when I saw you speak, you talked about Joseph Campbell a lot. I've been watching a lot of Joseph Campbell. I wouldn't say that he's anywhere near as interesting as you are. I think he's a lot more abstract.
Smarter. He's way smarter.
But so smart that he's out there,
he's a professor. You kind of glaze over a little bit.
Yeah. But you took the framework of some of the books that he wrote, and you've built some of your framework of storytelling that you use off of that. Give me an idea, like where did you get exposed to Joseph Campbell? Like, what was it about him that like captured you in order to make you come up with this new framework that you have?
And that's a great question. Nobody's ever actually asked me that. So I would assume my route. So because of my the big word we used in religious world is deconstruction. So I was reading a ton of books to try to figure out what I believed while I was a pastor, and it led me into things called narrative theology and storytelling from the concept of trying to figure out like what I believe.
Sure.
And then coming to the truth that I think belief is only found in story. Then I went down the nerdy rabbit hole of storytelling, trying to figure out what that was all about. And as soon as you do that, you'll find Joseph Campbell. So I read his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and then The Power of Myth, and he has several very academic books that, unless you're just really into it, are kind of boring.
Sure.
But he is a professor, and he's devoted his whole life to this. But his popular books are very accessible. The Power of Myth is probably the most accessible one, and there's an interview from PBS that I encourage people to find on YouTube, or you can pay for it. where he does like 8 hours just talking about it. But he spent his whole life studying every story that was ever told, basically every myth, including all the great religions of the world. And what he discovered was there's a DNA to story. I've seen people that have tried to like say he's wrong on this stuff, and it has not been compelling to me at all. Like, I do believe there's something in our human DNA that wants stories to go a certain way, regardless of where we came from. So this was true for Native Americans thousands of years ago. It's true for ancient Egyptians. It's true for the Far East. It's true everywhere. Like, these stories that he found were the same story over and over and over. Now, he got it to like 20 some or 30 some points, and his deal was like 80% of stories have these same 30 movements in them.
Sure.
I took it down to like 5 because it's just like there's a hero. That's the first thing. The hero wants a treasure, so he has to go on an adventure. And there's always a dragon or a monster that stands in the way. But the hero can't beat the monster, so a mentor comes along and gives the hero a sword. And I developed this with my partners at my old company, Brad Wise and Isaac Stambo and Mark Hassan. We worked out these sort of really simple ways of talking about it together. So I think of every story as a hero looking for a treasure, has to defeat a dragon, needs a sword, and a mentor needs to come along to give him that sword.
I mean, that framework right there, I've been digging into that in my mind as a product guy. And I want to talk about products specifically in a moment. But when you talk about Joseph Campbell and the hero with 1,000 faces, I have what I think that means. You've read the book. What is a hero with 1,000 faces?
It's they're going through this. He also calls it the monomyth, the one myth. One story is happening over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And not even to get like, even the story of Jesus has had, if you take it down to its basic points, had stories that have been told in various ways before and since. So it's often an orphan that, has to go leave their home for whatever reason, accepts a call to adventure. And even the story of like death and resurrection is in so many, even in Marvel movies, you just can't get away from it. Things are going to die and come back to life. Like that, that is in our DNA. We want that to happen, maybe because of our own, mortality or whatever. But so the monomyth of the hero with 1,000 faces is saying that in every culture he studied, it's the same basic story.
When people say that they don't like a movie or that was a bad ending, is that just another way of them being a layperson saying that didn't follow the monomyth? That didn't follow.
I think that's, I remember like there's The Thin Red Line or something like that, some war movie like I saw in a theater like way back in the day, and it was just so boring. And I was looking forward to watching it. It was like a 3-hour movie. It was one of those. And I just left because I'm like, nothing has happened in the first hour.
Yeah.
And look, I have an artistic streak in me, and I think artists ought to experiment with formulas, right?
Yeah.
We don't want all music to be pop music, but pop music for a reason.
Sure.
We don't want all movies to be Marvel movies. But those work primarily because it's already in us to want it.
Yeah.
We like patterns as human beings, and we also don't love to really be surprised.
Yeah.
So we want to know, like but I do love the tension because like Quentin Tarantino is someone that I don't think I could ever be friends with. He seems like the worst, but he is a genius, I guess. But like I don't really love his movies because I just can't stand the violence, sort of. But also, he does mess around with this a little bit. So it is the job of the artist to push the boundaries.
Yeah.
But
what would you say for
it unsettles us when it doesn't, when those things don't click.
Yeah.
When the hero doesn't get the treasure, that's very unsettling to us. Is
that some of the stuff that Quentin Tarantino does? Like, what is it that really bugs you outside of the violence aspect of it?
Help a layperson. Brought him up,
but I think
I'm not an expert on his movies because I don't like them.
Yeah, but at a high level, a layperson watching the movies I can't really tell you why I don't like it, or if I do like it, why that is. When I think
these
art
like films can like jump around and timeline and stuff, which none of that bothers me. Let me say it this way: like part of the role of the artist is to push back on what everybody likes, right?
Yeah.
And they're supposed to find new art and new things. But that's when we're talking about commercial things that are successful. I often tell artists this: you just have to sort of decide what you're going for. And I don't happen to think either one is more noble. Or the true artist sometimes think that's more noble. The true entrepreneur or capitalist probably thinks it's more noble to make $20 million. So
Sure. Well, it brings up a great point there, Disney.
Mm-hmm.
After I heard you speak, I've got 2 little girls at home, 5 and 3. So they're watching a Disney movie almost every day. And I'm seeing the elements of this play out, that normal existence that's taking place. In the beginning of so many of those movies, it never struck me before, man, they kill the parents off really quick.
Yeah.
In the first 5 minutes, the parents die, the kids become the orphans. And you talked about the importance of a story having an orphaned, or at least an orphaned heart. Can you walk me through the theory behind that?
A little bit, yeah. I don't know if I know that it's true, right? And in most great stories, the heroes are orphaned or have really awful parents or sometimes they just come from nowhere. Like the new Bob Dylan movie is a good example of that. Did you see that?
I haven't seen it yet.
I loved it. I forget what it's actually called right now. Like a Rolling Stone? I'll think of it later. But he just sort of pops up like at 17.
Yeah.
But it's still, he's on his own. There's obviously no parents. So he's starting off as an orphan, basically. Campbell would say it's that we all have orphaned hearts, that we all reach an age in our life where, and it can be different ages, and it is largely dependent on how much pain and kind of pain and failure you've gone through early on. So some people hit it at 9, 10, 12 years old because they've just been in such a bad situation that they realize I'm on my own.
Yeah.
Nobody but me is going to take care of me. This is, are you a fan of Hamilton, the musical?
I am a fan of Hamilton, the musical.
So this is, put a pencil to his temple. That's, I nerd out on Hamilton all day long.
Yeah.
But,
I just saw it in Richard Rogers Theater in October.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit late to the ball game on that, but
how's it start? How's the whole musical start?
The whole thing.
How does
a bastard, orphan, son of a whore,
and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence impoverished? Like, it's Lin-Manuel, man.
Yeah.
But that's it. How does a bastard orphan? That's the first part of the whole musical.
Yeah.
Which is the first part of every Disney movie and everything else. How does an unwanted, rejected soul make anything of himself?
I can't think of any great movies that don't have the orphan now. I'm trying to think of like one just to kind of refute what you're saying.
Well, I usually do superheroes because like they all are, like Superman, Batman, pretty much they all are orphaned. Or like Captain America is an example of like, he's not an orphan, but he is, because he ends up in a whole new generation, right? A whole new world.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, I don't know, I can't think of any either, but there are obviously. So I would think, I love Home Alone because there you have a very temporary orphan.
Yeah.
It's the whole plot of the whole movie.
Yeah.
But we know he's going to get his family back. That's going to be the pot of gold at the end, right? That's his treasure. That's what he wants.
Yeah.
So I keep thinking of like a Little Miss Sunshine or something. So there are movies that are really just about family dynamic, which maybe there's not an orphan, but we got to deal through the fact that we feel lonely. We feel separated.
Yeah. It's interesting how that's just such an important part of a great story, and you see it time and time again. You talk about how we want to see these same elements in the story. And Disney has captured that so well, because on top of the kids being an orphan, you also have this journey that they go on, and then they get to the pot of gold at the end, so to say, and there's something more to it from that. What I find so interesting, if we start to lean into how this all applies to entrepreneurship, to being a business owner, whether it's a product company, a service company, you talk about how people want to hear the same story over and over again. So for business owners who don't know this framework, Like you start there and say, you better learn the framework. But how many business owners are telling the story insufficiently or leaving elements of it out? And you're working with these companies and you identify for them, well, you're not really telling a story. Do you ever work with anyone who's already telling an adequate story and it just isn't working?
Yeah, because they're telling it to the wrong audience.
Okay.
Or they have the wrong sword. They're the wrong product.
Okay.
Right? So you can tell a great story and it not be a business.
Sure.
That's the story of my life.
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller. I don't have to. I can just tell a story. But no, when it works great, then my little 5-point outline plays out.
Yeah.
So for me, every great business puts themselves in the mentor part of the story, not the hero part of the story. But it's human nature to think of ourselves as the heroes. This is really hard for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because, you're thinking, okay, I'm starting whatever it is, starting Uber. Like the hero of this story is Uber. It's this company.
Yeah.
But it's not, it has to be the mentor. The hero is the person that can't get somewhere because they don't have a car. That's the hero. And so then the dragon becomes, the thing that's preventing them to get where they want to go. And our sword, as the mentor, we hand them a sword, which is their product. So to me, the company or the entrepreneur is the mentor. The product is the sword. The dragon is the classic problem that you would have put in a business plan.
Sure.
The treasure is what the hero really wants. And when those things work, then, I think sometimes we then forget to tell the story that way. We still fall back on one that when it comes time to tell the story, whether that's marketing or whatever, we can fall back on trying to just prove that we're a hero.
Yeah.
But I would always start with the pain of the customer because that's what the mentor has the sword to kill the dragon.
Yeah. Listening to you give that speech, and I think the way you put it so visually of, showing the hero who's trying to get to the treasure with the dragon in the middle. And then you drew that you can't defeat the dragon until you get to a mentor who gives you the sword to defeat the dragon. And then even those elements of realizing that sometimes that hero loses the sword prior to having to face the dragon, and they realize that and it was never the sword, it was them. Okay, all of those things being true, and you put it into the context of this business, the first thing that I recognized as you were giving that talk was that in many cases, I had positioned my businesses, either the product or the founder, as the hero, instead of them being the mentor and the sword. Maybe that's just the narcissist in me, but do you find that to be commonplace with a lot of companies?
It's instinct. It's instinct because we are all. I really believe this stuff to my core. Like I actually believe we're all going through our own hero's journey in a cyclical way, and our survival instincts, our orphaned heart, puts us in the hero role in our story. So it takes some maturity to realize I don't always have to be the hero of the story. I can be the mentor. And I still have my own, it's cyclical and it folds in on top of each other and all sorts of things. I still have my own hero story going right now. I do. I quit my job and I'm starting a new thing. And, that's a hero story. I'm going to need a mentor. That might be you. I don't know. I need some help. So that is happening. But we tell more than one story at a time.
Yeah.
And so I would say that entrepreneurs at some point realize that it's just not, your hero story is not going to sustain a business probably unless you are an insane narcissist.
Yeah.
And you just will never give up. But that you're eventually going to have to realize that this company exists to solve a problem. And therefore we aren't the hero. The person who's getting the problem solved is the point. It's the point of why we exist.
Yeah.
Or it's not solving a problem. So we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
That often, I find that sometimes I'll be brought in to help organizations with their story and they tend to think that's sales and marketing. And within 20 minutes, it's product.
Oh, really?
So,
Okay.
And I don't really necessarily see myself as a product expert, but the problem is not that you're telling a bad story. It's that your product isn't solving the problem you think it is.
Interesting.
So you got to figure it out, right? You either got to figure out what problem your product actually solves, or go invent the product to solve, but you can't storytell your way out of
A bad
selling
product.
a hammer of people that need a screwdriver. You just can't.
So what's the telltale sign of that when you come into a business? You consult with them and they say, "Hey Joe, come on in here. Our problem is our marketing. Like we need you to come fix the marketing." How do you know that it's the product and not the marketing?
I don't know if I always do, but I know it gets. I take them through. I have them talk about the hero, list everything about their target person, and ask them what the problem is. And then sometimes I'll see that I just don't think there's a little disconnect. Like, it's usually it's not like you just don't have the quite perfect product to solve the problem you think you're solving.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, look, if you're doing okay and you're selling a bunch of this stuff, that's great news.
Yeah.
Because that means you've designed something for the wrong person, and you're still doing well. So once you find the right person, imagine how great it's going to go. But if you're struggling, then it probably means, nobody wants wagon wheels anymore.
Yeah. Sure.
Whatever it is. Like you're holding on to some story that you believe that isn't true on your balance sheet. It's not working. But I think then, that's what I'm saying. I just don't think a great story can solve it.
Yeah.
It can maybe do a little bump, like buy you a few months or something. But
Sure.
Not,
I've never been a CMO before, but I would have to imagine that most CMOs fancy themselves the storyteller of the business, and a good storyteller at that. Maybe that's not the case. You've worked with a lot, but if these CMOs see themselves as great storytellers, you come in and say, "All right, show me who's the hero. What is the sword?" And they're getting it all wrong. Do you find that companies already have good storytellers in place and things are just kind of discombobulated, or do you find that they're kind of way off on the wrong track? They call you in because they've got an issue. I'm more so curious about what those issues are that trigger them to say, "We need Joe Boyd to come and teach us Hollywood-style storytelling for these products."
Yeah. I think it's really different on the size of the company. So I've had an opportunity to work for a few Fortune 100 companies, and that honestly is kind of intimidating. It's a whole new world. Like the CMOs there feel very much like not. I mean, they might identify as creative, but at that point, they're basically like CEOs, right?
Sure. Yeah.
They're CFOs often. They're like running huge departments. They want ROI. They want to. They start to care less about the story and more about, is this going to work? And so there usually you find creative directors that are the storytellers.
Okay.
That sort of thing. And I usually can. In that situation, I usually can pretty well connect with the CMOs, but then I can be a threat to the. You can sense it. Like if you come in as the expert, and I've been there, it's awful. Like if someone's coming in as the expert and you already feel like you're more of an expert than they are.
Yeah, but this is my job.
It takes some humility, right? That's just straight up consulting 101. It's just like the great thing about consulting is that you get to leave, right? But I do try to be careful to acknowledge that I don't know everything. But I would say most of the companies I work with are small to mid-sized companies that are probably trying to transition past just the entrepreneur story of how we started. I think that's the hardest transition to make is from like a startup. I mean, how many companies have been startups for 30 years,
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that happen to get it to the next level. And one of them is sort of bringing a unifying story around the company that's a little different, maybe sometimes than just the founder's story.
Yeah. What does that look like? Because I was just having this conversation with another founder CEO who was talking about his initial Facebook ads and why they worked. And he tried a bunch of stuff, but what really hit was the founder's story, the mission behind the products that he was selling, his why. And he did that story 20 different times, 20 different directions, and is just now getting to the point where that story is wearing off.
Yeah.
And is trying to figure out, what does he do next to have that next Facebook ad banger that's going to get the next few $1 million of sales in the door?
Yeah, I wish I had a perfect answer to that, but I do know it. The founder story can't, like Dave Thomas and Wendy's. Do you remember that? Like they went back to him. Like people forgot about him, and then they went back to him, and for 15 years he was the guy in the commercials. So I do think there can be a way that you keep the founder and their story center. But one of the things that I think it's Gary Vee who always says that nobody's going to care as much about your company as you do, and it's like you're kind of an idiot if you think that.
Yeah,
they just aren't. They can't. So part of it is that I feel like, and because of that, it gives the authority. It gives the story such authority because of how much the founder has leveraged and how much they care and the stakes.
Yeah.
One of the things about any great story is the stakes are high. So, there's no great stories about what am I going to have for lunch today.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean? So, but just the founder itself brings the stakes to it. My take as I sit here is just thinking it's probably just like everything else, an organizational, the same way you got to go from, that first time you got to hire a operations person or you got to, hire a CFO.
Mm-hmm.
Those are hard. That's hard for founders because they're the Wild West, you're running and gunning, and that's what builds the company. But at some point, if you want to become a bigger company, I also think that is an American, there's like American stories or myths. Some people might just be really, maybe you're half a $3 million company, man.
Yeah.
That might be what you're supposed to do, and that's okay.
It's not the American way. You got to have a plan to go to $1 billion,
Yeah, well, to make it 15 million, you're going to have to give up a lot.
Yeah.
So I think, because maybe it's the old pastor in me, but you also start to get in, just notice how founders are and how they think.
Yeah.
It's really rare that a great founder becomes a great leader of a huge company.
Yeah. And that's extremely rare. We can name the ones who are.
Yeah.
Is that few of them.
Yeah, and even some of the recent ones just feel like it happened so fast that I don't even. It's almost like cheating. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Like Zuckerberg, like that happened in 5 years. So
yeah.
Most. It's usually the second wave of leadership that's needed, and again, that's a maturing thing. I think
Sure.
that you learn that as you, often with failure, but most great founders also had a failure too. So and sometimes it's from holding on too long.
That's interesting because if the company goes through that maturing process, it sounds like you're saying that the story has to mature along with the company. And you kind of go from that founder story to really the story being so much more about a target demographic in that sword. It's like the new story almost, the new hero story. Because in the beginning, if a founder is telling a story that is their mission, their why, why they started the company, why they have this burning desire to make it happen, I guess they are kind of the hero of that story in some sense.
Yeah, I've never thought about it this way, but I'd say in individuals that you have to live your hero story before you can be a mentor. You have to. Maybe it's true for companies too. I never quite thought of it that way, but maybe that first stage is the company is the hero.
Yeah.
As much as I want it to be the mentor, maybe that's the like inertia or the booster rockets that get you off the ground. But then it's not going to be sustainable until you make the. And I think even the founders do that before they hit founder fatigue or whatever. You have, at some point pretty early on, you have to realize this actually exists for other people, not me.
Yeah.
So I haven't thought about that in terms of entrepreneurship a lot, but maybe that is how it goes.
Well, I ask because I think a lot of people who are listening to this are in a 9-to-5. They're thinking about starting their own business. They're kind of waiting for that push to go over the edge. I don't know that the story is going to, or storytelling is going to push them over the edge, but combined with all the rest of it, they get motivated to do it. Their question is going to be, what story do I tell first to get started? And then what story do I tell to grow and expand the company? And so let's kind of game plan it out. You got someone who works for a recruiting company today who's a full desk recruiter who's a job that I used to do, where you're hunting your own kill and then you're finding your own candidates to go into that company on the end of that. Nothing stops that person from leaving that company and saying, okay, I now work for Joe Boyd and Associates instead of fill in the blank recruiting company. Nobody's ever heard of either one. So they leave the company and they decide, okay, I'm going to make my first Facebook ad and start telling the story of what I'm doing. What would your advice be to that guy who wants to tell a story, but doesn't know where to start? Is it the personal story today, and then it becomes the company story in the back end?
The whole time you're talking, I'm wanting to take the story theory stuff, and I don't really care about what story they're telling. This is their one day. This is them leaving their normal world.
Yeah.
So I do think in that situation, I don't see how you don't wrap it up into your own story. Every good episode of Shark Tank is about whatever the founder did to get to that.
Yeah.
I just think, and you need to have that. You need to have that call to adventure, that inciting incident, and it can be positive or negative. This is the Jerry Maguire and the goldfish thing. Like, it can be quitting your job in a moment of glory, or Michael Scott Paper Company.
That's right.
Go back to the office. So it could be something like that, which is usually a young person's game, young person's ploy, or it can be more thought out. But the one day can be like the day you decide you're going to go back to school to get your degree that you need to do the job you really know you want to do.
Sure.
But I do think the story has to be wrapped up in what was it about the normal world that you left, and finding what's going to resonate with other people.
Yeah.
So the Airbnb, right? Do you know that founder story? Isn't it like do you know
Brian
better than
Chesky?
me?
I don't know the story. I just know the name.
It was something
Brian
like they
Chesky.
just rented out their, there were no hotel rooms left in San Francisco or something, and they rented their house out to friends. And they're like, we could do that again. So that's an example of a very simple, and one day we rented it out to friends and made $5,000 in a week, and we didn't know we could do that.
Yeah.
So I think the story has to be rooted in when the ordinary world gives way to the new opportunity, the new world.
Yeah, I love it. I also love Airbnb. I made all of my money off the back of Airbnb. So
you did?
If it wasn't for them, then I don't have my first business that ended up taking off. So it definitely worked out well. But closing the loop on this storytelling for businesses, I'm struck by the maturing of that story. You gave an example where you talked about, in the speech I heard you give, about Swiffer. That was Procter & Gamble that makes that. And that Swiffer is the sword. Can you give me a synopsis of just what that hero story looks like for something specific like Procter & Gamble?
Well, yes. Let's do things that I make sure I don't have an NDA on. Let's do Excedrin migraine. I never worked with them. That's one of my favorite ones because it was a sword that slayed my dragon. So I've had migraine since I was a kid. I'm 51, so there wasn't a lot of great migraine medicine over the counter. Or you could get stuff from your doctor, but it would make you sleep for 24 hours and just weird stuff. And then that came out, and I realized if I felt a headache coming on, if I took it within 2 hours, the headache went away. And otherwise I'm in bed with a towel over my head, throwing up, all sorts of stuff. So that's a company. Excedrin is a mentor that gave me these little capsules, magic pills, right? That changed my life. So that slayed the dragon so that I could get my treasure. What was my treasure? Well, it was different things, different days. Sometimes it was going to my kid's t-ball game. Other times it was making the big pitch meeting without having someone else have to do it. Doing a cross-country flight without feeling like I want to throw up. That's my treasure. So that's an example of it. Something like a Swiffer could be the treasure could be, usually their target person's like a stay-at-home mom or something like that. Back in the day anyway, kind of still is. They just, who knows?
That's right.
I don't know.
Just don't say it. Okay.
But it really isn't a super clean floor that is the treasure usually. It's something around ease. Like, I've got a baby on my arm. I've got to make dinner. I do have a part-time job. I got to figure out how to work at home. Sure, it'd be nice to just clean this kitchen floor without mop and water and soap and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how a product can be moved around. But that does, if you really believe that that's what you're doing, then you're going to talk less about how clean the floor is. You know, if unless you find the real treasures that people are afraid their babies are going to get sick from dirty floors, but that's not what it is.
Sure, yeah.
What they want is to have time to sit and rest.
Yeah.
And so what you're telling them is you're going to have a clean house and time.
Yeah. One of the big buzzwords right now in my world of e-commerce is UGC content. You know about user-generated content, UGC. I think that it's one of the most saturated spaces right now. Like everyone was doing just brand content, and then somebody had the great idea of saying, "Oh, if we give 1,000 people this, and then they go and post on social media, we can really blow this thing up." Worked for a few people. Now, most people who are doing it that they are saying it's working for aren't making any money doing it. The companies are blowing up, but they're like negative. I think Dr. Squatch is actually an example of a company like that. Tons of influencers, but they don't make any money from it. And they're hoping that in the long term, enough users, repeat business comes back in, and it all makes it worth their while. Okay, where am I going with this? The point of me saying that is I think about the concept of UGC content, and this whole TikTok shop generation has turned into someone holding a product up, and sometimes they give a speech along with it. Sometimes they just hold it up, and they're putting out there saying, "Hey, buy this, buy this. I'm vouching for this product." It occurs to me that if they were telling that story instead of saying, your Excedrin story, I had this problem, this product fixed this problem for me, and now here's what I get to do on the back end of that, that the UGC would be 10 times more effective if that were the case. You'd advocate that I go to our UGC creators and tell them, "Hey, this is the framework I want you to use."
Which I bought. I did buy something. The only thing I've ever bought off the TikTok shop was a little microphone, because I do. I guess I'm a content creator on TikTok, so my sound's always awful, and I owned a video production company, so it shouldn't be, but I don't care.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to spend a bunch of money. I know what it takes to get really good sound, like we got right here. But this guy was like, "It's just $3," and he's like, "My sound used to be terrible, and this is everything." I was like, "I'll try it for $3." It didn't work.
Yeah,
but his story, it was his story that I was like, "Oh, he's like me."
Did you return it though?
No, not for $3.
See, they won.
And then I'm old enough to be like, maybe I just hooked it up wrong.
Yeah.
But then I gave up on it. But I do think exactly what you're saying. Like people have to see themselves in the story and the product, right?
Yeah.
So unless you're a Kardashian or something, maybe people just want to be like you.
Sure.
Which is still a story, right?
We all aspire to be that level of story.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, I wouldn't think most people in that world that are really making, I would say the influencers that are probably making the most money have figured out the story thing.
Yeah.
I would bet.
Yeah. Do you think it's conscious for them, or do you think that these influencers who are just making money think, "I'm just really good at this"? But in reality, they're just really good storytellers, and they don't even realize it? Or do you think it's conscious for everyone?
I don't think it's conscious for everyone. I think good salespeople, it's just sales, right?
Yeah.
Now it's just online. It's the same insurance, cars.
It's true. Yeah.
Like, some of them knew they were great. Some salespeople know they're great stories, but some people just know what. And to me, there's also a dance and there's an intimacy to story one-on-one.
Yeah.
And some people just know how to tell a story with someone. That's the improv stuff in my background, right?
Sure.
It's like to yes and get there and finish the sentence at the same time as the guy,
Yeah.
And that, I think a lot of people are doing that as pure instinct, but it is storytelling.
Yeah. You mentioned yes and.
Mm-hmm.
I think my team is already tired of me saying yes and. I told them all why I'm going to say yes and going forward too. But in the talk that I heard you give, I was inspired by the impact of saying no but, no and, or yes and. Can you break that down
Sure.
for everyone listening so they understand the same knowledge that I have?
I'll try. This comes out of improv comedy world, so that was my background with the Second City. it's our first rule of improv. When improv was growing as an art form in the 50s and 60s, we didn't know to call it that back then, but over time they sort of studied what was working, what wasn't. And what was working is the earliest forms of improv comedy, not stand-up, but like where two people would get on stage and act out a story together, like in the middle of a play, just with no script. When they said yes and to each other, it worked, and it was funny, and people laughed, and it told a story. When they said no to each other, they might get a laugh initially, but then it just died. And so they developed this idea that we're always just going to say yes. So if I say, doctor, we have a problem, then you might say, you might want to say, I'm not a doctor, I'm a algebra teacher, because that's what you thought you were going to be when you walked out there.
Yeah.
But that kills the scene. So no matter what I say, you're going to say, yes, nurse, we do have a problem. We lost the patient. So you said yes, and now we have this whole story, and we've sort of implied that we're in a hospital. So now we know the who, what, when, where, why. We know all of it in 2 sentences. And so, again, patterns with human, like we want to know the story that's being told to us. A lot of people in the real world, I think, and I always say this, you can't say yes to everything. Obviously, you're not going to say yes to things that are immoral, unethical, or stupid, or whatever.
Sure.
But we are wired to say no more than yes, and I like to challenge people that there are some things you can say yes to, and more importantly, really to say and, to add what you have to it, and to have meetings at your company that are yes and meetings, where you can't say the word no for this meeting. This is a brainstorm meeting about a new product, or this is a meeting about our new marketing campaign. New initiatives are really great for yes and meetings.
Sure.
Because some people are just no but people, or more people are yes but people, which still means no.
Yeah.
Where you'll say something and they'll say, yeah, but, and then, yeah, but we tried that, or yeah, but we don't have the budget. Yeah, but I don't know if we have the manpower. So none of that's really bad. It's just, they're trying to be careful. They're trying to be, or they're trying not to expend energy.
Yeah.
But a leader
extreme pessimists.
A leader needs to pull the yes out, because if we say yeah, but all day long, nothing will ever get done.
Yeah. And I saw that in the exercises that we did in that workshop too. And I've been surrounded by a lot of people who are those yes, but, and I would almost frame it as more of, yeah, but what you don't understand, that's the thing I've heard over and over and over again. When you've got a business owner on one side and then someone who has an entrepreneurial spirit who also owns that business on the other side, the two really clash when the business owner who's really acting out of fear and kind of holding on to what they have is, yeah, but we don't understand that this could happen and that could happen. Instead of that, yes, and we can build on top of this too. It's an easy way to say no to new ideas.
Yeah, and I think learning to play it out and then go back. I also spend time, I teach people to say, like, we're not going to make a decision right now. But let's say yes. So instead of, because what you might end up getting to the same place as the guy that said no, but you just don't have the experience. But when you walk it out on your own, you realize, oh yeah, maybe it won't work.
Yeah.
Now that I've walked it out. But if you are in an environment where you just constantly say no, everybody just basically becomes teenagers, right? You just want to prove that you know better and that dad doesn't know everything. So I think you got to let people, at some level, you have to let them make the mistakes you've already made, or they'll never learn. But at least let them do the thought process to see why you're saying no.
Sure.
Right? And the only way to do that is to say yes, ironically, right? You got to let them walk through say things like, what would that look like? Okay, let's spend, you know what? Forget, we're not going to make a decision for the next 15 minutes. Let's spend the rest of this meeting just thinking about what that would look like if we did that. For real, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And then just see, and you might be wrong. It might work.
It comes in with an open mind.
Yeah.
One to have your mind changed. The last thing I want to ask you about, and it goes along with the improv, because I realized doing the fun improv exercises with you during the workshop that
I'm glad you called them fun.
I enjoyed it. Honestly, I'm not really an introvert, but I'm not really an extrovert. I can go into my shell, but those types of games where you're forced to kind of think on your feet. But what I realized was, well, this becomes a lot easier if I just focus on listening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lesson, I think, to be learned for business owners in listening. You've done improv for a long time. I imagine that the listening piece is one of the most important components of it. Then you have been entrepreneurial, you've owned businesses. Why is it that leaders in particular have such a difficult time listening? And what could we learn from improv?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because they're living in the future. Some of them might be living in the past. It's one of the two. It can't be anything else. So if you're not listening, you're not present. That's why you're not listening. Because you're thinking about what you're going to say, which is the future. Or you're thinking about what you wanted to say, which is the past. And in this conversation with us, I think we've been mostly present, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen you, maybe you've been doing it, but I haven't seen you thinking.
I haven't gone to my notes over here yet.
Like what question am I going to ask if he says this versus this?
Yeah.
You had things you wanted to talk about and you brought them up as it was organic. And that's the way most of real life is with relatively normal people, but I think when we start telling stories or, an improv when we get on stage or it comes time to build out a campaign, we lose sight of one of our greatest human superpowers, which is to be present and to adapt, instantly adapt. That's just a conversation. It's all it is. We're just adapting. You don't know what I'm going to say now, but you're going to do that or something. Yeah. You're going to adapt. You're going to respond. You're going to say, yes, you did that. And, so I think that's the main thing I learned from improv. And the great irony, if we want to try to bring this full circle, is that's also what every kind of major world religion tries to teach you, right? So I went into religious studies. You study Buddhism or the Sufism or parts of Judaism, parts of Christianity, mystic Christianity. Like every religion has a stream that the main thing they're trying to teach you is to just be present. Life is present. Eternal life is not in the future. It's now. This is what I think it means if I'm going to preach for half a second.
Yeah.
When Jesus is recorded as saying the kingdom of heaven has come and is coming, which he says over and over, I think what he's saying is it's here. It's present. Whatever I'm saying God is present. So if you look for it in the future, you'll always be looking for it.
Yeah.
And I think, weirdly, I knew all that, but then I went to a Second City improv class and learned it because it forced me to just be present.
Yeah. It's funny how you can have those transformational instances in life that bring you to that point of oh, I did know this, but now this is the why, or this is the theory behind it too. And I think that for a lot of business owners, I can be very guilty of living 6 months into the future or longer than that, living off of a plan. I think it's important to have vision of knowing where you're going, but to be able to practice and to exercise being here now, we're on our way to get there.
Yes, leaders have to have. I think the best leaders are people we feel like have been to the future and come back to talk to us. So they're not trying to get us to live in the future as much. They're more saying, I'm here with you right now. I know what's going on. We're going here. I've seen where we're going. This is where we're going. But I'm not going to live there until we get there. But this is what we need to be thinking about. There's this tension with leadership. If you only are a visionary leader and nothing else, you lose kind of faith eventually.
Sure.
Because at some point you're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to come back to the being present with everyone. And we're all just kind of broken. We're afraid to hear that we're not doing a good job. We're afraid to hear that we haven't been a good leader. We're afraid that people haven't learned what we thought we taught them. So we don't ask those questions because we don't want to hear it. But that's being present sort of makes all that come out.
Yeah. That's deep. And I think everyone needs to hear a little bit of that too. It's a great place for us to wind things down. If you've got your own consulting company, you're working with businesses actively today, how does one find you to come and work with them? Whether it's one of your improv classes, whether it's the consulting on the storytelling, working in the marketing department, where do they find Joe Boyd?
I'm working on making it as complicated as possible.
That's always good.
That's my people have to find me. I want them to look for me. No, it is relatively new for me. I just exited my last company, LeaderCast. But I have two websites, joeboyd.net. It's not .com because it was $5,000.
That's right.
It's .net. But that has like some of my keynote speaking stuff and consulting stuff on it. But then I write 3 days a week at calledforadventure.com. That's really how to interact with me. So I've got about 1,000 subscribers there, and I interact with folks that want to learn more about living a great adventure and storytelling. So probably go there, calledforadventure.com, and then find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find on the social media. So,
and you're getting more active on Instagram. TikTok's back, so you're going to be on TikTok.
Went away for 18 hours or whatever.
That's right.
No, I accidentally actually blew up on TikTok talking about Gen X stuff.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if I blew up, but I got like...
Was it a hot mic?
I got like 35,000 followers like in a few weeks.
Is that right?
But you were saying this, like I'm really tired of talking about Gen X stuff, but that's the only thing that it wants me to talk about. So I'm figuring that out right now. I don't have huge social media beyond that. You know, I've got 9,000 or 10,000 followers on most platforms, but it is interesting just talking about story. Like I love telling that story for like 6 months. I did all the reminiscing. We talked about G.I. Joe and He-Man and Rubik's Cubes and parachute pants. And I did it all. And now I'm like, I got nothing else to say, man.
Yeah.
So I try to talk about something else. I get like 3 views.
Well, there's nothing more humbling. Talk about bringing it really full circle, talking about failure and humbling than making content. You put it out there, and it's not just you that can see the results. Like everybody can see the results, right?
Appreciate that.
You very nonchalantly talk about 10,000 followers. For someone who's new to the game like me, I'll take 9,000 to 10,000 followers. That sounds great, you know? But as we progress in this journey and you're putting content out there consistently and doing it over time, I like the element of that failure, that instantaneous feedback, because what's great about social media is that you do get the feedback loop so quick. Yeah. And you know, okay, that didn't work. Let's move over here. But if you're someone that doesn't like to hear that your video sucked, or you're hiding how many likes you got on your post or how many views you got on the post, it's like, come on, you know?
I got you. I do like that. I have enjoyed TikTok. I wasn't even on it a year ago. But I like how it seems like it's trying to get people that don't know you to watch.
Yeah.
Compared to like Instagram or Twitter, especially Twitter back in the day, like only your followers are going to see it unless people start, doing things. So I do kind of like that about the TikTok algorithm, that feels like it goes and finds people that might be interested in what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
But I don't have a plan for it right now.
Yeah. Well, I think the new algorithms are trying to do the same thing with Facebook, and Instagram now is the trial reels and all that too. But this has been great. I think that what I'm most struck by in your own personal story is that you talk about it being failures along the way as an actor, but it led you to what you're doing now. Now you're in a position where you can add value to any company to come in and help. I think about companies having trouble with either the hook, the story, or the offer. Get somebody to stop, tell them a compelling story, and then put an offer in front of them. And if something's not working, it's probably one of those three.
Yeah.
I think in the instance of my companies, where I'm recognizing, talking to you, that I've been stuck, has been on the storytelling, and especially the graduation and maturing of those stories too. So it's inspirational for me. You think about these great Hollywood stories and the Disney stories that are out there, and you connect all the dots to be like, oh my God, he's right. Like they do have all of these elements inside of them. And so what is that missing for me? So I'm excited to lean into your blog more. I went to your website, joeboyd.net, and went to blog, and it showed an old article, and I thought, oh, he's not writing anymore. But you are actively writing.
Yes, that's the stuff I got to fix. Called for Adventure.
Calledforadventure.com.
Yep.
Okay. So definitely check that out, and we'll put the link to all of Joe's socials into the video for this too. But thanks for being here with us today. I learned a ton, and I know it's going to be great for the audience as well. And I'm excited to get this thing all clipped up and get some shorts out there and show everyone what you're all about.
All right. Thanks for having me, man.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.